What's up YouTube, it's Donovan Hartman. Welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to be talking about the best way to set your mountain bike up for steep trails. Okay, so the first tip I'd like to talk about is brake lever position. When you're going steep downhill, the best way to have your brake lever set up is relatively high. So right now my brake levers are in the middle position, so I can show you what the change does to my body position. So right now I have my brake lever set around 45 degrees, which is in between 90 and 0, obviously. So you're at approximately that angle going downhill. But when you're steep, you're gonna be hanging off the bike a lot more, which actually straightens your elbows out this way. And having your brake levers in a higher position to where they match the level of your finger makes it so that you can have a much stronger riding position than if you were like this. Because that way your wrist can just blow off the bar. But if your brake levers are higher, you can be in a stronger, better attack position while descending. Okay, so now I have my brake levers around 20 degrees, which is what I recommend for like a starting position to getting into the flat lever feel. Eventually, I'd probably recommend going to 15 for super steep, super gnarly terrain. But I feel like 20 is a good area to be in for most gnarly and technical riding. So yeah, on to the next tip. Okay, so the next tip we're going to talk about is the balance of your bike from weight on front to rear. So a lot of people say to raise your bars by either getting a higher rise bar or bringing your stack up on your stem, and I actually disagree with that because I feel like keeping a lower stack height or your normal stack height actually benefits in keeping grip on the front wheel. What I would recommend actually doing is either raising a little bit of low speed compression or adding a few PSI to the fork, or even the opposite if you want to go for a softer suspension feel. Taking some compression off the shock or lowering the shock PSI. This makes you sag into the rear of the bike a little bit without taking a ton of weight off of your hands. So your bars are still sitting up higher, so you're in a more controlled attack position on the downhill, but your fork's not diving and you still have a lot of weight on the front wheel, which raising the stack or raising the bar height necessarily would take away from the control on the front wheel and the traction. Obvious. I would recommend going for a little bit wider of a handlebar width. So I run about 780 or 775 and I'm 6'1". My height can go all the way up to an 800 mil bar. I just find that gets a little bit more unwieldy. I can't make as tight of corrections and tighter stuff, but for pure steep, it'd feel nice. And the next bit that I'd like to talk about, also fairly obvious, is lowering your seat height. If your dropper's not quite long enough, like mine's not quite long enough because my bike's pretty small for me right now, so I actually have to raise and lower my seat before I go up and down super gnarly trails. So yeah, that's, I feel like, a fairly obvious change you can make. Okay, and the next thing we're going to talk about, not so obvious, is probably tire pressure. So I'd recommend running 1 to 3 PSI lower in the front tire than the rear tire, just so you can get a bit more traction since we raised that front end with the suspension pressure. Rear, I weigh around 150 pounds, and in my rear tire I run about 27 PSI. And I'll change that going up or down depending on the trail that I'm riding for general stuff like this, like super chunky, steep rock slab type stuff. 27 in the rear and around 25 in the front. And I'll lower that down if it's just steep, loose stuff. I'll lower that down to about 23 in the rear, 21 in the front. Or if it's not quite as steep and just fast, chunky rim dinger sections, I'll go up to 30 in the rear and 28 in the front. So yeah, it's a fairly wide spectrum of tire pressures, but I feel like that's a good place to start. hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope these bike setup tips help you progress your riding on steeper, gnarlier terrain. So yeah, see you guys soon.